Hello and welcome back to my channel where I discuss Fantasy Formula 1. Today we're going to talk about the results for the Japanese Grand Prix, what those results mean going forward, as well as what my personal plans are heading into China. But before we begin, I just want to say thank you so much if you've watched any of my prior videos, if you've liked, if you've commented, and if you've watched any of those prior videos and are now watching this one, consider subscribing. So in my team selection video for Japan, I was toying with the idea of using my wildcard, and the reason for that was because of the price change algorithm being solved. I made an entire video about that, about how the price changes actually work in F1 Fantasy, and if you haven't watched that video, I suggest you go and do so. I will be using terminology from that video in this video and in all my future videos, pretty much because that's such a big aspect of the game, and we now know exactly how it works. So I ended up actually using my wildcard. Already, you might say, well, if you watched my chip strategy video, I explained that the wildcard is not actually that powerful, and the most powerful thing about the wildcard is to use it to catch up, or use it to change your team if it is bad, and I did feel like my team wasn't that good. I had the wrong back markers, I had been quite unlucky with the price rises, I saw team values upwards of 107 million, and I was sitting at a measly 102, so I felt like I had to do something drastic to not fall behind too much early. And this was my solution to it, mainly by going for the Aston Martin Constructor. I was always planning to go for Lance Stroll. I feel like Lance Stroll is just going to keep increasing in price, but mainly to go for the Aston Martin Constructor for a one-race punt, and it worked out, right? All of my assets increased in price, so the wild card used in terms of gaining team value was definitely a success. And especially if you compare it to what my team was before Japan. I mean, we can just go back and look at Australia. This was my team going into Japan. I had Albon and Show, which both DNF'd. So, definitely a success there. Sometimes you just gotta hold up your hands and say, I got lucky, and I have been very lucky when it comes to dodging DNFs this season, for sure. I sold Max Verstappen before his DNF in Australia, and now I sold 2 drivers, and I would have had at least one of them, maybe even both, if I had not used my wildcard. So ended up with a total of 212 points, which put me at 98,000 globally, which is a decent green arrow, about 30k or so. And in a week where I sort of conceded that I'm not going to have Red Bull, so I'm probably going to lose points doing this. And yes, I did lose points by going without Red Bull. We're going to discuss that a bit later. But in a week where I was like, I'm okay with losing points because I'm doing this for my team value, actually gaining positions was a happy surprise. And I think those DNFs to the highly owned assets of Albon, Show, and Ricardo definitely helped me here. So yeah, let's quickly go over to the F1 Fantasy Tools website and look at all the results and see what we can make of them. Here we are on the F1 Fantasy Tools website, where you can see all the scores for all the drivers super easily. Just quickly click them and see the scores without having to click through multiple menus like you have to do on the F1 Fantasy website. I like this website a lot. You should use it too. Where do we begin? Well, let's talk about the big one. I did lose points, definitely, going without Red Bull Racing. They ended on a massive 108 points. I saw this on Twitter. This is the most points a constructor has gotten in a non-sprint race weekend since Imola 2022. A massive haul of points, mainly thanks to them having the first, second, and third fastest pit stop, getting all of the 18 fastest pit stop points. Max Verstappen got the fastest lap. Checo got a lot of overtakes. And they finished on a 1-2, so a lot of points for Red Bull this week. I definitely lost points going without them, and heading into China and US, which are both sprint races, Red Bull Racing are a must-have. There is no two ways about it. You have to have Red Bull Racing going into these 2 weeks, because if you don't, you are going to fall behind points-wise like crazy. I would even say this is like the first time I will actually recommend this. If you are in a position with your team, maybe you've already used the wildcard so you don't have that, maybe you want to use another chip for this week, or any other scenario like that, if it is ever a time to use a -10 hit to do an additional transfer, it is to get Red Bull Racing in this week. If your team looks like or are structured in a way where you cannot afford Red Bull Racing in 2 moves, I would consider making 3, perhaps even 4 moves. I would probably, if you did not have your wildcard available and you had to make 4 moves to afford Red Bull Racing, I would make 4 moves to get Red Bull Racing in, because you would have them for both China and USA, back-to-back sprint race weekends. And if they're going to produce hauls like these in non-sprint race weekends, imagine how much points or like how many points you're going to lose by going without them. Definitely must-haves, and when I'm talking about my transfers, getting Red Bull Racing back in is my #1 priority. Verstappen back to his best, got 47 points, fastest lap, pole position, won the race, 2 overtakes. I spoke about it after the Bahrain Grand Prix that the 45-point haul is sort of like what you expect with Max Verstappen. You're expecting him to get 45 points for that premium price. So I do still think that the Verstappen, Red Bull Racing, and Ferrari combo is still by far the meta. It is what you should be aiming towards getting. It's just, when is it worth going for that, and when, like, what other sacrifices do you have to do to get to that team? Because sometimes it's not worth it. If you're stuck there with Alex Albon and Logan Sargent and Pierre Gasly, maybe that's not the team you want to go for, right? But looking towards the Verstappen, Red Bull Racing, and Ferrari combo should definitely be in your pipeline. Another asset that I feel like is important to talk about is Lance Stroll. Lance Stroll is going to keep increasing until he is at 15 million. I am 100% sure of it. I was going to say more. I was going to say a higher number there, but I'm 1,000% sure. Lance Stroll will keep increasing until he's 15 million. There's no 2 ways about it. Yes, he can crash, but when he crashes, he's only going to lose 0.2, and then he's going to get an average score, even an average score of 8, and increase 0.5. Stroll will keep increasing in price, 0.5 or more every week he doesn't DNF, and the points losses you get from him DNFing, I feel like are worth it. If you were to tell me beforehand in the season that, okay, you have to pay 40 points, but you will increase in value by 5 million, I feel like that's worth it. Lance Stroll is just in the car that he's in, how poor he is in qualifying, getting overtakes, ending up higher, positions gained, and him being considered as C-tier assets when it comes to the price changes algorithm. He's a must-have. And it's probably the main reason why I don't want the Verstappen, Red Bull Racing, Ferrari combo yet. Because you would need a pretty big budget, a very, very large budget, to be able to afford Verstappen, Red Bull Racing, Ferrari, and Lance Stroll. Usually with Verstappen, you need 4 cheaper assets than Lance Stroll to afford. So I would stick with Stroll and go without Max Verstappen, and do either one of the Ferrari guys or Checo alongside Stroll until Stroll has hit 15 million. And once Stroll has hit 15 million, then you can look to get Max Verstappen in. I just think it's clearly the best strategy right now, and I would even go so far as saying Stroll is the most essential driver to own right now, because he's so prone to those price increases that are going to be invaluable later on in the season. Speaking of invaluable assets, the Haas's are insane. That race pace looks so good for where they qualify that I wouldn't put them in the same category as Stroll, but they're right below that. They're right below. And considering they are way cheaper than Stroll, the potential for them to also rise to 15 million is greater. Now, I don't think they're going to increase more than 0.5 in a race. They must have a crazy race to do that. So 0.5 is sort of where you're expecting them to land each race in terms of a price increase, which means that if any of the other back market teams come with bigger upgrades soon, once we get to Europe, the Haas's might not become that viable anymore. But for right now, it's Stroll, Hulkenberg, Magnussen. That's what you should be having in your team. Right? The Alpines are useless, completely useless. Before I knew how the price change algorithm exactly worked, I was saying I wanted Alpine because they qualify badly and then can maybe rise in the race. No, that's a lie. They are both just useless. They don't have any race pace. They don't have any quality pace. They don't have any race pace. They are the worst car on the grid by far. They are complete and utter avoids until they fix that tractor of a car. It is. I thought because they were cheaper and they were dropping in price, they were gonna have a higher likelihood of increasing in price, but it doesn't look like that's the case at all. So for me, the Alpines are complete avoids now, especially at the price point they're at, considering they're still sort of a similar price to the Haas's. Next up, we have the Saubers. The wheel nuts are a problem. The wheel nuts are a big problem, but that was a really good race for Bottas. And if he had not had the wheel nut problem, when all 5 of those cars, what was it, Tsunoda, Sargent, Bottas, Stroll, and who else? Was it Gasly maybe? Went into the pits and Tsunoda overtook them in the pits. Bottas was ahead of Tsunoda there, and they had to do like a safe pit stop. They have to take their time. They can't aim for those 2-second pit stops. So they have like a 4.5 second pit stop right now, which is better than 40, you know. But that 4-second pit stop cost Bottas the position to Tsunoda and to someone else. I think Bottas dropped 3 positions in that pit stop alone. If he had a regular pit stop, I think he could have been 10th. I think he could have been the one to end in the points. So if Sauber could just fix their wheel nuts for the price they're at as assets, they look pretty good. Way better than Williams. Williams just looked bad. I mean, yes, Albon crashed. Sargent got an unlikely price increase, but I mean, Sargent got that price increase after nearly beaching it in the gravel, so he could just as well have been on a minus point haul this week. So in terms of the slower assets, it's Tsunoda, the Saubers, and the Haas's that I would be going for personally, and avoiding the others. As for the expensive assets, my opinion on them haven't really changed that much based on this race. It's still the same. It's Verstappen if you can afford it. Otherwise, it's Perez, Leclerc, Sainz, and the others are complete avoids. Alonso, avoid. Norris, avoid. Piastri, avoid. Mercedes, avoid. Yeah, that's about it. For the constructors, the Aston Martin, as I previously mentioned, is now considered a B-tier asset, which means it will increase in price alongside Mercedes, McLaren, and Ferrari, and not like the backmarker assets, which means they're now a much worse option. Definitely much worse. At most, they're going to increase maybe 0.3 in a race. I don't really see them getting anything higher than that. So, if you're looking for a cheap constructor, if you really want Verstappen, if you're looking for cheap constructor, it's the Haas. I mean, you can the points speak for themselves. They're shooting in price every week. We're increasing by 0.5 every week, and getting 20 point back to back 20 points is really good for a cheap asset. Their drivers are getting overtakes because they're very fast on the straight. Hulkenberg has a chance to get into Q3. Which means that Haas can get bonus points from that. Hulkenberg is at least one of their drivers is always making it out of Q1, so you're not losing points for the qualifying score. And I mean, yeah, for me it's a no-brainer if you're going for a cheap constructor to go with Haas right now. But the actual no-brainer option is going for Red Bull and Ferrari. Ferrari, not as big as last week, but 59 points is still really, really good. It could have been higher if they had any of the fastest pit stops, which they didn't. Red Bull took all of those points this week, so with one decent, better pit stop, they could have ended up on a 65 plus points score. So Ferrari also looks set to just keep increasing in price up to 25 million. I think it would be very unlucky for Ferrari to ever decrease in price. They would have to have one, maybe even two DNFs to decrease in price. So Ferrari and Red Bull seem essential to me right now, or at least Ferrari look essential just because of the price rises. And if Red Bull are going to score points like they did in Japan, especially for China and Miami, you're gonna want to have Red Bull Racing as well. So then, the Chinese Grand Prix. And there are a few things that are important with this Grand Prix. Number one, they haven't raced there in a long time. And they have not raced there with the current cars. So China as an entity is very, very unknown, which makes me very hesitant to use any of the big chips. Always when there is a sprint race weekend, you have to consider all your chip options. And as I discussed in my chip strategy video, I want to use the limitless chip in one of the earlier 3 sprints of either China, Miami, or Austria. But since China is such an unknown, that is a very powerful chip to use in a race where you don't know how the cars are going to perform. And especially because it's a sprint weekend, they only have 1 practice session, right? They're going to have 1 practice session and then go straight into sprint quali. So I would personally avoid using chips. I discussed in my team selection video that I was considering maybe using my limitless in China, but the scenario in which I would have used that is if, say, Lance Stroll DNF'd and Aston Martin did not increase up to 15 million. Because if Aston Martin were still at the C tier, I could have used my limitless in China, gotten the probable increase from Aston Martin without getting their points, right? Or with getting the Red Bull points, and then done the transfer in Miami. So I could have sort of swapped my Miami and China strategies. But since Aston Martin is now at 15 million, I'm not interested in having them anymore. It's not that they're a terrible asset. They do allow you to own 2 premium drivers. So later on in the season, it might be an option, especially if they were to improve. But it's just that Red Bull Racing and Ferrari are so incredibly good that it sort of devalues Aston Martin as an option. Now, previously they had the advantage of being in the C tier, but since they are now B tier, that definitely makes them worse. Another important thing about China is that the team lock deadline, if you compare that to the Grand Prix weekend deadline, you can see that it's different. Well, what does this mean? Well, this deadline is counting down to the sprint. Now, they've changed the sprints this season. Previously, they had free practice 1, qualifying, then sprint qualifying, sprint race, and then the actual feature race. But now, on Friday, you have the free practice 1, the sprint qualifying. Then on Saturday, you have the sprint race during the day. Then you have the qualifying to the race on the Saturday afternoon. And then the race is still obviously on Sunday. This deadline is counting down to the sprint race. This deadline is counting down to the free practice or to the free practice 1. But if you look at the difference between them, this means that the deadline for our fantasy teams is not the sprint qualifying, but the sprint race. So you can actually watch the sprint qualifying and then make your transfers. Very important. Don't make your transfers early this week either. Never make your transfers early in this game. But don't make your transfers early because you can watch sprint qualifying and then make your results. At least that's how I interpret this. If they've made some mistake, maybe. But you don't get any points from the sprint qualifying. So maybe that's what they're thinking. And if that's the case, you can get a lot of information based on the a sprint qualifying session, because, I mean, it is a sprint qualifying, but it's essentially the same as a normal qualifying. So just having that insight is massive, and it will be a great advantage to you as a strategist. So pay attention to that. Don't make your transfers before sprint qualifying. You can make them before the sprint race on the early session on Saturday. So then, what are my personal plans? Well, it's pretty simple. I have 2 free transfers because I used my wildcard last week. And the main thing that has to go, or rather the main thing that has to get in, is Red Bull Racing. I need Red Bull Racing for this week. I must have Red Bull Racing for this sprint week. And I really want Red Bull Racing for for the race after that in Miami, because that's another sprint weekend. Now, I might use my Limitless then, but even then, just getting Red Bull Racing in now seems like the right time. And leaving Aston Martin now seems the right time. So to afford that, I need to sell either Carlos Sainz or Charles Leclerc. If I sell Carlos Sainz, I can get Red Bull Racing in. But then in terms of my drivers, I can only afford either Alex Albon, Zhou Guanyu, or Logan Sargent. Those are the only assets I can afford. Whereas if I keep Carlos Sainz and sell Charles Leclerc, I can get Kevin Magnussen in. So those are my options, really. Getting Red Bull Racing is a must for this race, in my opinion. If you don't have Red Bull Racing, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot. So Red Bull Racing must have for China. So my DRS boost driver essentially is either Carlos Sainz or Charles Leclerc, and I think it's going to be Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz has outperformed Charles Leclerc so far this season, for sure. And having Kevin Magnussen over either the Williams or the Sauber, to me, it's a no-brainer. Kevin Magnussen has increased 2 million already this season. Started at 6.2, is now 8.2. And as long as Haas look this powerful in the race, they're going to keep increasing. So, to me, this is a complete no-brainer move. Last week, I had a million thoughts in my head. The week before that, I was weighing up many different options. This just seemed like the obvious choice here to me. I don't really see anything else that is... I mean, I guess if you think Charles Leclerc is going to be way better than Carlos Sainz, then maybe. But with this layout, I can't imagine Williams is going to be that good. Sauber still has the wheel nut problem, so I'm not really keen on doubling up on them. And the Haas has amazing straight line speed, and well, you can see there the back straight of Shanghai is pretty long. So I can only see the Haas being good here as well, really. Yes, all of this will most certainly depend on what happens in the sprint qualifying. Maybe Charles Leclerc just looks way better than Carlos Sainz. Maybe Carlos Sainz doesn't look up to it. Maybe someone crashes and ruins their car in the sprint qualifying, and I'm just not interested in them as an asset anymore. But all of that is in the future. That's in 11 days' time. Right now, there's a clear and obvious move. Kevin Magnussen looks great for both points and price increases, and the points from Red Bull Racing are just, I mean, they're on a different level. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like. Any comment you will leave, I will try and respond to it. And do subscribe if you are interested in seeing how this season pans out for me. Hopefully, the slight point loss of going without Red Bull for this week and going with Aston Martin will pay off in the long run. We'll see. Only time will tell. See you later.